To talk about our calling through the lens of the book of Genesis. So I want to start in Genesis chapter 12, and I want to encourage you on your own to read Genesis 12 through 50 and ask the Lord to speak to you and talk to you about different aspects of calling and what it looks like to be called by Him and to walk with Him and to fulfill the purposes God has in your life. And so I want to start by reading Genesis 12 verses 1 and 2. We're verses 2 and 3 is actually where I'm at. But anyways, it says he's speaking to Abraham, and he says, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you." I want to talk a little bit about this and think about it for a moment that Abraham was 75. Genesis 12 tells us when God first spoke to him about what he was supposed to do. And you got to think, it wasn't until he was 100 years old. Later on in Genesis, we find out that he has the child of promise, Isaac, which means laughter. And so one of the first things that I want us to realize is when it comes to our calling, oftentimes God speaks to us in an early age, or He speaks to us at a certain season of life, and He plants a seed in us about our call. But it may not actually be fulfilled for like 10, 15, 25 years down the road. In fact, I know several people who were told something by the Lord in their 20s, and they didn't see it begin to unfold until their 40s, and some even in their 50s. And I share this because sometimes we think, well, this is the call on my life and I have to make it happen. And when we look at the story of Abraham, there's many things I want to point out. And the first thing I want to point out is the first thing the Lord told him to do was go. And oftentimes when God gives us a call, the first thing He does is not necessarily tell us to go fulfill that call. He tells us to do something else. Why? He's preparing us. He's developing our character so we can walk in the fullness of the call He has for us. And so His next instructions to Abraham was, I want you to leave your family. I want you to go. And I want you to go to a place that you do not know. And you're not going to know you're there till I tell you you are. So basically, he packed up his bags and just started going. And he had to trust the Lord along the way. And that is an important aspect of our call. To fully walk in our calling, we have to learn to trust in the Lord. We have to learn that when He says go left, we go left. He tells us to go right, we go right. He tells us to stop, we stop. You see the same thing with the Israelites in the wilderness. They were led by the cloud. They were led by the pillar of fire. And so that is God's heart for us. Isaiah 42:16 says He'll lead the blind by ways they do not know. So this is part of walking in our calling, is getting to a place where we can trust and depend upon God, where we can truly live John 15, where we recognize in John 15:5, Jesus said, apart from Him, we can do nothing. And when we begin to recognize that, then we can walk in our call. The second thing I want you to point out in this passage, and I'm still kind of in Genesis 12, and we'll start unfolding the rest because we're going to go from Genesis 12 to Genesis 50 pretty quick here. But the next thing is He tells them that all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. And so first, right before this, says, I will bless you. And then He also says, I'm going to protect you. Why? Because He's going to curse those who curse you, and He's going to bless the nations through him. And so this other aspect of our calling is we're not called just for ourselves. We're called and we're blessed to be a blessing. God gives us something, whether it's revelation, it's knowledge, whether it's finances, whatever it is that God gives us, blesses us with, it's so that others can be blessed with the things He's given us. It's not just for ourselves. And so that's an important thing to recognize. And then the other thing is the Lord told him that He would make a nation out of him. And so his calling actually impacted generations to come. And this is one of the important things that we see in the story of Abraham. The call that he was given didn't just last with him. It then spilled into Isaac and the way he lived. And then it spilled into his sons, Jacob and Esau, and the way they lived. But another important thing we have to recognize, especially looking at Abraham, is that we can't force God's promises to happen in our life. when we do, we get what happened to Abraham. Him and Sarah were waiting almost 20 years, and they had, or 15 years, and they had no son. And so Sarah says, take my concubine and have a son with her. And they name him Ishmael. And it creates a rift in their family that still is going on today. It's the Arabs and the Jewish people, and the fighting started with Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac was the child of promise, the child born through Sarah, and Ishmael was the child born of a slave woman. And there's a lot of scripture that talks about that. But we have to recognize that we can't make our calling happen. What we can do is say yes to the next thing Jesus has asked us to do. And when we say yes in this moment, we unlock another puzzle piece or step, so to speak, that gets us closer to walking in the call God has for us. And the other thing is we got to recognize as we walk in aspects of our call, because one of the things is everywhere Abraham went, he had favor. Everywhere he went, he prospered. So he did have blessing. And so did Isaac. Isaac was blessed. Isaac had great wealth. He had servants. And then Jacob and Esau both were blessed. They had flocks and they had children and they had wealth. And so we see that it trickles down the line. But the other reality is we have to look at our calling and say, what part of our calling is for us? What is the cost of our calling on our family? Because we also see that evidence throughout the story of Abraham and his children and his children's children. But also, what part of our calling is not just for us, but also going to be passed down to our children? Because we are called to raise them up. That's part of our call, is raising them up and training them in the way they should go so that they can carry on the calling that part of the calling God's put on us, but also the unique calling he's put on them. And so it's really important that we recognize those things, that we don't force our calling, that we walk in our calling by being obedient, that we trust God and allow him to develop our character, because your character is the only thing that's gonna sustain you in those tough times. Obviously, your relationship with the Lord, abiding in him, John 15, like I talked about, recognizing we can't do anything apart from him, but then also recognizing that he's developing our character right now. And there's things we go through. There's things Abraham went through, Isaac went through, right? 25 years waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. Man, that's testing. And then you get the promise, and then the Lord tells you to sacrifice your one and only son, right? That's a testing. You feel like you've lost the promise, but do you really trust God? Because that's the question he's asking each of us. If you want to walk out your calling, you got to trust him. And when we trust him, we see the fullness of it. And that is exactly what happened for him, because Isaac wasn't sacrificed. God provided. And it's important we recognize that. And then we see with Jacob had to work to get his wives. Jacob had to go through trials with Laban, his father-in-law. And they contended, and the Lord allowed Jacob to come out victorious. Not only that, he wrestles with the angel of the Lord, right? And says, I won't let go of you till you bless me. And there's something about wrestling with the Lord and saying, I'm not going to give up. You told me that you were going to give me this promise, and I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give in. I'm going to go after the things of God till I'm walking in what you have for me. There's something about perseverance that is very necessary and very, very needed to develop our character. Perseverance with the Lord and perseverance in the things He called us to. If He's asked you to do a certain ministry, don't give up in that ministry. If He's asked you to live in a certain area, then don't leave that area till He's told you to move on. If you're obedient and you persevere even when it's tough, you will be rewarded. And that is what these men did. And that is what we see. And we even see that with Joseph. Joseph gets imprisoned, right? And I feel like the call is lost, right? He had these dreams about his brothers and his father and mother bowing down to him and him having this place of leadership. And he's in prison, right? Yes, he's running the prison, but he's still in prison. Nobody knows he exists. He's able to interpret dreams, but nobody even knows he's gifted. But he remained faithful to the Lord in the midst of all those trials. And then when the Lord said it was time, man, the Lord released him. And all of a sudden he went from being in prison to being number 2 in the largest kingdom in his day. And all of a sudden his brothers come to him because of the famine that the Pharaoh dreamed about, and they bow down. And he's living his dream 17 years after it was first shown to him. And so we got to recognize that the importance of perseverance, the importance of developing good character, the importance of not making our call happen, but trusting God even when it's hard, and believing that a day will come when we'll walk in the things He's asked for us, but being faithful in the things He's called us to do in this season. So these are the important aspects that I hope that will flesh out more as we talk about understanding our call and walking in our call.